Once upon a time in a small farming town in New Jersey, there was a property owner named Mr. Fred Tedesco. Mr. Tedesco owned a vast farm where migrant farm workers lived and worked during the harvest season. These workers, from faraway lands, lived in humble conditions and were often isolated from the world outside the farm. One sunny day, two well-intentioned individuals, a lawyer named Mr. Shack and a physician named Dr. Johnson, ventured into the farm to help the migrant workers. They wanted to provide them with essential medical and legal services, as they were aware that the workers had little access to such assistance. As Mr. Shack and Dr. Johnson entered the farm, they were stopped by Mr. Tedesco, who demanded that they leave his property immediately. He argued that it was his land, and he had the right to decide who could enter and who could not. Mr. Shack and Dr. Johnson tried to reason with Mr. Tedesco, explaining that they were only there to help the workers, but Mr. Tedesco would not budge. With no other choice, Mr. Shack and Dr. Johnson continued their mission to help the workers despite Mr. Tedesco's objections. They knew that the workers needed their assistance, and they were determined to provide it. However, Mr. Tedesco was furious and decided to take legal action against the duo, claiming that they had trespassed on his property. The case of State v. Shack reached the courts, where the judge was presented with a tough decision. Should Mr. Tedesco's right to exclude others from his property prevail, or should the rights of the workers to receive essential services take precedence? The courtroom was filled with anticipation as both sides presented their arguments. Mr. Tedesco argued that his property rights were absolute, and he should have complete control over who could enter his land. In contrast, Mr. Shack and Dr. Johnson contended that the rights of the migrant workers to access essential services should be considered, and that the property owner's rights should be limited in such circumstances. The judge, wise and fair, listened carefully to both sides of the story. He acknowledged the importance of property rights but recognized that there were situations where the rights of vulnerable individuals, like the migrant workers, must also be taken into account. The judge ultimately ruled in favor of Mr. Shack and Dr. Johnson, holding that the property owner's right to exclude others from his land was not absolute, and could be limited to ensure access to essential services for those in need. The tale of State v. Shack became a cornerstone of property law, emphasizing the balance between property rights and the rights of individuals requiring essential services. Law students all over the country learned the story, understanding that property rights, while important, are not always absolute and can be limited in specific circumstances.